Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. I am very pleased to be joined today by Ilan Berman. Ilan is an attorney and a policy analyst and is the vice president of the American Foreign Policy Council. All right, Ilan, thank you so much for sitting with me today. And of course, welcome to Israel. Maybe we can start off with really your thoughts on the way that the Trump team is dealing with Iran, renegotiating a deal. Is this just a JCPOA 2.0? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, it's interesting. So, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always nice to be back in Israel. So, I really appreciate the opportunity, and in particular at this time because Trump policy, I think, very much is in motion on a whole bunch of different fronts, but especially in the context of the Middle East, because the expectation, I think, for most people, myself included, was that the second Trump term would build upon the first, so that the maximum pressure policy that we saw under Trump 45 would extend into Trump 47, would take a look at the economic levers that the United States and the American allies in the region and in Europe have over the Iranian regime as a way of squeezing the regime, as a way of building leverage. We had really frittered that away during the Biden administration. So the key here is, I think, first and foremost, to rebuild leverage. But the region is very different. And so the Iranian regime, as a result of what's happened in the region, as a result of Israeli military successes over the last half year, is really strategically on the back foot. So there's a lot of that leverage that exists already. And the administration is trying to capitalize on that. The Trump second term, I think, very clearly is interested in deconfliction. It's interested in deal making, and we see this on multiple fronts. We see this not only in the context of the United States and Iran. We see this in the context of Israel and Gaza. We see this in the context of Russia and Ukraine. So I don't think this is necessarily a surprise, but like most things, the devil is in the details. And so the Trump administration walked away in May of 2018, walked away from the 2015 JCPOA because fundamentally it thought that there were three things wrong with it. It thought that it was too short, that it was time limited instead of open ended. It thought that it was too narrow. It didn't encompass things like Iran's ballistic missile program, which is a key delivery system for nuclear weapons, and that it was too generous. It provided Iran with too many economic offsets and set the stage for an Iranian military expansion in the region. All of those things were true, right? History has proven that all of those things were true. But honesty demands that we say that now that the Trump administration is back in these negotiations, has sort of brought America back into these negotiations, those benchmarks need to still apply. We really don't improve our strategic position if we go back into a framework that looks an awful lot like the JCPOA. Whatever we build has to be longer, it has to be stronger, it has to really roll back Iran's nuclear advances in a material way. And at least as of right now, I'm not sure that the track we're on is going to do that.
Now, there are certainly many in the defense space here in Israel who just believe a deal is not possible. There are no terms that will quell Iran's thirst for a nuclear strike on Israel. Is that just a barrier between the Israel way of thinking and the U.S. way of thinking that just can't be resolved, that we just view the issue completely differently? U.S. will always seek a deal and Israel is always going to push a military option?
Well, I think there is, on a certain level, there's definitely a meeting of the minds. But if you think about it purely from an American transactional perspective, the Trump administration is very interested in resolving this issue one way or another. The president has said that if negotiations fail, then he will be in support of Israel. He will back Israel if there's a military strike. And I think that tells you a great deal. The view that now permeates the White House is that America does not lead, but America supports. And if there is a deal that's sufficiently robust, that a military option is not necessary, then all the better. But if the negotiations fail, if the negotiations drag on, if the Iranians try to pull a fast one, then Trump, at least for now, appears to be fully ready to back an Israeli military play. The key here, then, for Israeli policymakers is to understand this dynamic and to press as hard as possible for that deal to be as rigorous as possible, to be as limiting on Iran's nuclear capability as possible. And here, I think this is a conversation really not just about Iran, because what the fundamental flaw we're discovering a decade later, the fundamental flaw of the JCPOA were all of those things that Trump saw that were demerits to the deal, that were flaws in the deal. But the real fundamental flaw is that it enshrined in the Islamic Republic an indigenous uranium enrichment capability. And now we have a situation where we are trying to walk that back. We are trying to get the Iranians to give up their domestic enrichment capability. And they, for a whole host of reasons that are very rational for them, they are very, very eager to maintain that capability. But the way we resolve this or don't resolve this, I think, will determine everything, because there are countries in the region like Saudi Arabia that have expressed an interest also in building a nuclear capability. And from, as seen from Riyadh, why would they accept no domestic enrichment if the Iranians get to keep it?
Now, you said something I picked up on about leading versus supporting a military action and the U.S. involvement. A lot of people here in Israel suggest that perhaps a U.S.-led campaign against Iran would be an easy win for the Trump administration, that Israel has kind of prepared the playing field for the U.S. to lead an attack on Iran and destroy part of this axis, the most vulnerable piece. How does that kind of narrative play into the U.S. approach to foreign affairs in terms of leading a campaign versus supporting a campaign? On the one hand, if they're only supporting, they can kind of take this America First policy. But on the flip side, if they're not leading it, do they really be able to claim credit for the accomplishments?
Well, as we say in Washington, all politics is local, right? This sense that this administration is trying to pare back entanglements, international entanglements that the U.S. has had up until now, entanglements that expanded under the Biden administration. That tells you a lot of what you need to know in terms of the appetite in the White House. The appetite in the White House, this is an administration that is very supportive of Israel, that is very pro-Israel, and it is one that will forcefully defend the special relationship. But there isn't that much appetite to do so from the front. There's appetite to do so from the back. There's appetite to support an Israeli military play against Iran if it comes to that. But I think because the president has staked so much political credibility and so much of his political capital on the idea that under his administration, America would be more judicious with its use of force internationally, it becomes a hard sell for America to lead in the context of Iran. Whether or not it should is a different matter entirely. I'm of the view, and I have been for a long time, that Iran isn't just an Israeli problem. Iran is a regional and an international problem, and America should have a much more forceful and forward-leaning role. But what we're seeing from the administration, I think, is a couple of steps behind that, where the administration is supportive and it sees the broad vision, but it isn't willing to itself take the first step.
So you're in Israel right now. Any thoughts on the current public opinion in Israel on this issue of Iran, or really anything else that you're discovering as you're here?
I'm finding a couple of things that I find. I always learn a lot when I come to Israel. I come to Israel a fair amount, but I always learn a lot. To me, there is a couple of things that I think are in motion at the moment. The first is the way Syria is rising in terms of international profile. For a couple of reasons. It's rising in the discourse in Washington as well, because everybody's watching what Ahmed al-Shara is doing with the new post-Assad government in Damascus. But in the Israeli context, this is a much more security-oriented decision, because it's not just about Israel and Syria, although it is very much about that. It's also about Israel and Turkey, because the coup that unseated Assad back in December was very much orchestrated in Ankara. And so there is a sense that the Turks are, spreading their wings in the region, Whether or not that's a sustainable play, it remains to be seen. But it's very interesting because from the Israeli security paradigm, this is an issue that really hasn't received a lot of attention in the last decade or so. In the last decade or so, Israeli security policy has been almost entirely, overwhelmingly focused on Shiite Islamism, on Iran, on the Ring of Fire and the proxies that the Iranian regime has built, and for good reason. But now that Iran is on the back foot, now that the Ring of Fire is at least partially disassembled, Israelis are beginning to wake up to the fact that there are other threats out there, including Sunni Islamism, including Turkish imperialism. So this is, I think, one to watch. The other thing to watch, I think, is the question of information warfare. The Israeli government just passed its budget a couple of weeks ago with regard to sort of fiscal planning for the next calendar year, which includes, for the first time, a real substantive allocation of money for, we don't call it hasbara anymore, right? It's called toda'ah, right? Knowledge. And I think that's exactly the proper shift, because hasbara, I have long contended this is the wrong word, because it comes from the root le'asbir, to explain. So the presumption is, if Israel explained properly, then everybody would very naturally rally to its side. That's simply not the case. That's not what the information environment looks like now. So a new strategy is necessary, a new strategy for punching back against false narratives, a new strategy for helping to contextualize what foreign audiences are seeing, and also for battling back against disinformation and propaganda. But that strategy isn't built yet. So for me, one of the most interesting things to watch over the next several weeks is, now that there's money behind, we're putting money where our mouth is, right? In the context of looking at Israeli information warfare. Great. What does that strategy look like? What is Israel going to do? What is it going to pay for? What is it going to invest in to really reshape the informational conversation in its advantage?
Let's go to you. You mentioned additional enemies, not just looking at Iran. So the flotilla right now off the shores of Israel that originated in Turkey, do you think that will have an immediate impact on the way Israel views Turkey as a
So I
threat?
think it can, and I think, frankly, the Turks know this. And so, because like in Washington, all politics are local, in Turkey also all politics are local. And Erdogan, the Turkish president, has a lot of power, but he's aging, he's increasingly infirm, and he's dealing with an increasingly Islamist constituency, at least in some parts of his electorate. And so the signaling, and by the way, at the same time, if you've noticed, the conversation about negotiating with Hamas has almost entirely bypassed Turkey. Turkey very much wants to be a player. We see this by Turkish hosting of delegations from Hamas, by Turkish engagement with elements of Hamas, not in the Gaza Strip, but headquartered elsewhere, because Turkey really wants a voice in this evolving debate. And yet it's not really getting one, because there are many, many governments that are weighing in on what the future of Gaza should look like, how Israel should negotiate with Hamas, but nobody's asking Ankara for its opinion. And so what you're seeing on the part of Turkey and on the part of the Turkish government is efforts to remain relevant, efforts to inject itself into the Palestinian conversation, because it's necessary for Erdogan's domestic constituency. But at the same time, we remember what happened the last time there was a Turkish flotilla that came to Israel, or came to the Gaza Strip. And so I think the Turks understand very well that this is a dangerous play, because if the Israeli Navy interdicts the IHH flotilla, if the Israeli Navy, if there is some sort of skirmish, then it pits the two countries on a confrontation course. And while Turkey is talking tough, I'm not sure it's ready to take that step. And that's why the flotilla hasn't set sail. That's why we haven't seen anything more than Turkish bluster. The bluster is bad enough. I think if that's where it ends, I think we're in good shape.
So I'm curious, with your research, what do you think we can expect to see as the next development in this war? Is it going to really be Iran focused? Is it not going to be Turkey right now? What can we anticipate moving
Well,
forward?
there's a couple of things here, right? Because and advisedly, you know better than I, sort of what the Israeli government is liable to do or is likely to do, and sort of what it's thinking. In the context of the United States, I think it's all about assurance, right? It's all about reassuring American allies. One of the reasons why the American campaign against the Houthis is so important is because it level sets the American commitment to the region. If America really has the ability to erode Houthi capabilities in a substantial way, it impacts not just regional confidence, although it definitely does that. It also stabilizes maritime commerce in the Red Sea. And as a result, this becomes really important. And it has the added benefit of further eroding the Iranian ring of fire. But there's a decision that has to be made by the Trump administration. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has already talked about it. Um, we've been dealing so far with the symptoms of the problem, not with the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem, and not just of the Hamas problem and the Hezbollah problem, but also the Houthi problem, is the fact that this is inspired, supported, and aided by the Iranian regime. So we have a little bit of a disconnect because the next steps in the broader campaign require us to put more pressure on sub-state groups like the Houthis. But in order to do that properly, we have to take a harder line towards Iran. And at least for the moment, we're disincentivized from doing that because America is in the middle of talks with them. So this is a balancing act that I think is going to be very hard to do, but a lot depends on our ability to credibly reassure our allies in the region that we're not going anywhere. We're not pivoting to Asia. We're staying in the region. We're focused on this, and that we are committed, despite the fact that there may be difficult choices ahead, we are committed to reshaping the regional security environment in a way that disadvantages America's enemies and the enemies of Israel.
Now, usually I speak with Israelis living in Israel, very attuned to what's happening here. So it's a privilege to be able to speak with you, who you have your head in both worlds. With everything happening right now with the US economy, the turmoil, the roller coaster, do American legislatures care so much about the Houthis, about Iran? Do they see how it has an impact on the West and on the US? Or is really the economy the number one priority and they just don't want to get bogged down in all of this mess in the
Well,
Middle
I think that's
East?
a great question because I work on foreign policy, and I always have to remind myself that American voters don't vote on foreign policy. They vote on the economy, they vote on immigration, they vote on social services. Foreign policy is very far down on the hierarchy. But given the fact that we are in the frame of great power competition, which has economic elements, it has post-pandemic, it has supply chain elements, it has trusted technology elements. The commercial aspect, the way the international security environment impacts both in a positive way and a negative way, as it's impacting now, impacts the stability of the international economy, really raises the temperature. It raises the stakes for us to have a robust foreign policy. So right now, the Trump administration is, I would say, less focused on foreign policy than it is on the economy. But that economic focus, as you see from the tariffs, as you see from the discussion about supply chains, is very international. Uh, a lot depends on how countries respond to the economic pressure that's being levied by the Trump administration. But it's very clear that the Trump administration is trying to use economic tools and economic pressure to rebalance its relationships with the international community. And that has all sorts of overtones for foreign policy. You see this, I think, most clearly right now in the context of U.S. relations with China, because the idea was that we would levy very significant tariffs on China as a prelude to the Chinese being more, I would say, compliant, being more willing to do some sort of trade deal. The Chinese haven't done that. The Chinese have actually responded to American tariffs with Chinese tariffs. They've escalated the trade war. And where this goes, I think, is going to have a material effect on both how much America is focused on Asia vis-a-vis Europe or the Middle East in terms of foreign policy, but also on the stability of America's relationship with its allies.
That was Ilan Berman from the American Foreign Policy Council. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.